Good morning, everybody. Bore Chi. Thank you very much for attending our seminar. Very great to see that there's so many people attending on this fantastic day. I'm Nigel Hollett, the director of the CLA in Wales. And I don't know about you, but it really does feel that changes in the air. Where we are in South Wales, there's fantastic weather. We're all thinking about maybe where we might be going away, probably not abroad this year for many people. And so it does feel that absolutely changes in the air. Restrictions are being eased, and there is a real appetite from the public to actually go and visit our beautiful the UK. So I think we're trying to be very upbeat in this seminar and talk about where the opportunities are, reflect a little bit on what the challenges might be, but very much looking forward to a great year this year after such a challenging last year and a bit due to COVID that we all know so much about. I don't feel I need to go over that any further. We've in the CLA, for those of you that are members, we have nearly 3,000 members across Wales. We work with a wide range of organisations, and I'm very pleased to say that we lobbied very hard with the Welsh Government to get a change in the permitted development rights for temporary uses of land from 28 to 56 days. So hopefully for a number of you that should provide some opportunities, but also more generally, there is a real thrust now by Welsh Government, and we are pushing as hard as we can to really get the economy going, to make people think about what they can do, to change things, to make this year very different to previous years, so we can just get back to some sort of normality where we can start getting on with our businesses and getting on with what we do very, very well. My job is to chair the event and to introduce the speakers, which I will do as they come onto the screen. But there is going to be a good opportunity for some questions at the end. It's hard to see everybody, so do raise your hand or put something into the chat bar, into the Q&A bar rather, if you'd like to raise a question. So either type it in the Q&A bar or put your hand up when we get to questions, or wave best you can, and I'll make sure I try and answer all of those questions. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Charles Trotman, from the CLA, who's going to tell us a bit more about where we are now. Over to you, Charles.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and good morning, everyone. I'm, as Nigel said, I'm Charles Trotman. I'm the Senior Economist and Rural Business Advisor at the CLA in London. And what I'm going to do is look at rural tourism in a general context in Wales. We'll look at some of the history of the last year or so, and then look at where I think rural tourism could be in the short and medium term. So in a sense, it's a policy overview of where we are at the moment and what we believe will happen in the future. Next slide, please. So rural tourism and the economics. So if we look at the figures, we know that tourism accounts for 75%, or rather in Wales, domestic tourism accounts for 75% of all tourism in Wales, and this provides the scale and breadth of the sector. And it's also important to remember that it's a major provider of employment in Wales with just over 150,000 jobs. And we're not just talking here about the fact that rural tourism provides this pool of employment. We're also looking at the supply chain and the activities that rural tourism supports. And of course, that generates even more revenue, both direct and indirect, for the Welsh economy. So how much is actually spent by the consumer in terms of rural tourism? If we look at the most up-to-date figures from Visit Wales, if we say that consumer spend in 2019 was £6 billion, we can say with some confidence that the spend for rural tourism in Wales was around £4.5 billion. And again, using the same logic, if we actually look at the losses incurred by rural tourism operators in Wales, would say during the pandemic, it ranged between £2.5 to £3 billion. Again, a sizable figure. But despite these losses, the sector itself retains certain dynamic qualities, such as I said before, job creation and the economic multipliers within the supply chain, which means that the sector itself is more resilient and is more able to recover from the pandemic faster than other sectors. Next slide, please. So let's look at what happened post-lockdown. I called it 1.0. So if we look at the realities of what happened after the first lockdown, we know it was a period of significant uncertainty. No one could really be sure if there would be sufficient demand to make up for businesses losing a number of months trading at the start of the season. And despite the support of schemes such as the furlough scheme and the availability of loans, this uncertainty led to a central policy question in that could rural businesses and tourism businesses survive a 3 winters scenario? And what we found was something very interesting, but also somewhat alarming, was the position and the guidance being given by the Welsh Government as well as the UK Government at this time. Now, we worked with the Welsh Government on the COVID-19 secure guidelines and made it very, very clear at that time that tourism businesses needed sufficient time in order to reopen. This meant there needed to be consistent messaging, and the guidance, which was changing on a daily basis, needed to be clear. And of course, we issued our own bespoke guidance for rural tourism operators, answering questions such as, and the main question was, what goes into a risk assessment? Now, the problem that we had was that at the time that businesses were able to reopen, there was still this significant confusion. And one of the big problems, or one of the big issues that we had, was whether there would be pent-up demand. We know from the data that we've seen last year, there was an element of pent-up demand, and more people were going on what we call staycations. And what we're seeing this year is a kind of a copy. It's happening again from what happened last year. In a sense, it's repeating itself. But what we mustn't do is make the same mistakes that were made last year. Next slide, please. Now, of course, we know that there were further restrictions put in place because infection rates began to increase and the pressure on the NHS was reaching a breaking point. And of course, the lockdown that we've been in, certainly since January the 5th, means that the objective is to further reduce infection rates. But of course, the big change is that we have the vaccination program, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So the key message here is that we need to learn the lessons from what happened last year. Next slide, please. And one of the key problems that has emerged, and it was very, very obvious in 2020, was this lack of an integrated approach between the UK government in London and the Welsh government. What has happened is that this lack of integration has led to clear confusion and inconsistency in approach. And it's also very, very important that we try and prevent this lack of integration happening again. But also remember, and this is the importance of the vaccination program, is that this lockdown, and as we move forward, everything will be based on science, will be based on data. It's no longer being managed according to politics and business economics. It's now being managed according to science. And this is important because it proves or provides the context for the recent decisions made by the Welsh government. Next slide, please. Now, of course, this is, in a sense, a second roadmap out of lockdown, and hopefully we are coming to the end of the pandemic. And certainly at the beginning, the First Minister, Mark Drakeford, didn't appear very keen on dates, which is, if you look at what's happened in the past, that's quite understandable under the circumstances. But as we know, we've now got a series of dates. And this time, the underlying principles and factors are substantially different. As we come out of lockdown, slowly, cautiously, with a very effective vaccination program, it's now clear that caution is absolutely critical, but dates are important and they're indicative. And of course, we've got tourism businesses were allowed to reopen from March 20th. Well, some tourism businesses allowed to reopen from March 27th. As of Monday, April 12th, travel between Wales and the rest of the UK, in particular England, has resumed. April 26th, outdoor hospitality is allowed, including wedding receptions of 30 people, as well as outdoor attractions. May the 3rd, 2 household bubbles can meet indoors. And from May the 17th, there will be permitted indoor activities for up to 15 people. Things are moving, things are evolving. But what it's also clear is that as the Welsh Government gets more data and reviews infection rates and hospital admissions, it will mean that the picture becomes far clearer than it was when we were in this position last year. But it's important to stress that these are the earliest dates at reopening, and everything can change and everything depends on the data. Clearly, there is light at the end of the tunnel. The problem is we don't know yet how long that tunnel is, but we can see the light shining at the end, and we're moving towards the, getting out of the tunnel. Next slide, please. So very briefly to recap on the COVID-19 secure guidelines, these are fundamental because if a business doesn't apply the secure guidelines, they will not be permitted to reopen. And as I said, the risk assessment is absolutely crucial to that. And that includes the use of PPE, reducing transmission in the workplace through increased hygiene, communicating with guests, but also communicating with the local community to making sure that everybody who's involved in the business and in the wider environment knows what's actually what's actually happening within that business. And all the details relating to that government, the Welsh Government guidance, is on the web link, which is on that slide. Next slide, please. So let's look at reopening the Welsh rural tourism economy. And as again, I'm re-emphasizing this point very, very strongly. Everything depends on the review of scientific data. But in order to reopen, a business needs to be in a position that it can comply with the regulations, complies with the the COVID-19 secure guidance, and has procedures and protocols in place to make sure that everything is safe, not only for the business, but also for the visitors. And it's also important that the rural tourism businesses themselves are ready to reopen. But if we take a more positive, we look at the upside of this, particularly in practical terms, this is the second time that rural tourism businesses have been able to reopen. And for many, it should be an easier process. All the details relating to how the roadmap is panning out in Wales is available on the COVID-19 hub on the CLA website. Encourage everybody to have a look at that, particularly the revised tourism guidelines, which we posted up on Monday. Next slide, please. So if we look at staycations and pent-up demand, what will the future of the rural tourism sector actually look like? And it's clear that there are indicators pointing to a firming up of this staycation trend. Data that we've seen from Visit Britain suggests a far greater interest in holidaying in Britain now rather than going abroad. And of course, it's going to be difficult, certainly this year, to travel to venues in Europe, for example. But of course, the staycation trend is nothing new. And in a sense, it first appeared after the economic crash in 2008 and 2009. So the staycation trend provides the base from which rural tourism businesses are able to plan ahead. But there also need to be policy tools put in place by government that can be used to further encourage rural tourism businesses as we move forward. Next slide, please. One of these key policy tools is VAT, and the government's decision to actually reduce VAT last year from 20% to 5%. Now, this relates mainly to accommodation providers and also attractions, but it also does affect ancillary services within the supply chain, within the hospitality supply chain. And the CLA as an organization has been lobbying government for this reduction from 20% to 5% for a number of years. And with the third lockdown, or this lockdown, continuing to put pressure on tourism businesses, as I said, the government decided to extend the reduction at 5% for a further 6 months. It also introduced what it's called an interim rate of 12.5% to run after that initial 6-month period until March the 31st, March the 31st, 2022, after the end of the first 6 months. And on the 1st of April 2022, the intention will be to revert back to the 20% rate. Now, this means there's been progress, and this will help cash flow. And the objective of the government is, through this policy measure, is to help business cash flow. Now, what it means is that if demand levels hold up as we think they should, it will mean that a lot of businesses should be able to recoup the losses from 2020 by retaining the benefit of a reduction, as I said, originally intended by government. But if we are to build up a resilient rural tourism sector for the future, that temporary reduction actually has to be made and has to become permanent. And we've done quite a lot of modeling on this. And over a 10-year period, we recognize that if the VAT reduction was to become permanent, the first 2 years of that 10-year period would be a loss to the Treasury. But at the end of the 10-year period itself, the Treasury would actually benefit, certainly to the tune of at least £4.5 billion. That's on a UK basis. And it shows that by businesses using the VAT reduction to reduce prices by a certain amount, it increases demand. This then feeds through to increasing employment for the business and indirect employment through the supply chain. By increasing employment, you increase income tax receipts and national insurance receipts. And again, through the supply chain effect, the multiplier effect, you increase trade. So in a sense, reduce VAT, everybody wins. Next slide, please. Now, as Nigel said at the beginning, we've been lobbying heavily on extending the 28-day rule. And we're glad and we welcome the government decision to extend it to 56 days to January 2022. And for landowners, this extension could provide very important additional income through, for example, the provision of pop-up campsites. And it's novel ways at diversifying income, which obviously will be welcomed. But if we're looking at what happens after or in 2022, should the extension be made permanent, I think we need to look at what the impacts and effects this extension will have on the Welsh rural economy before we decide to make it a permanent feature. There are advantages of extension. It provides farmers with greater flexibility and gives the public wider choice, particularly at a time when demand is likely to be high. But I think before certainly the CLA commits itself to a permanent extension, I want to make sure that there is a consistent approach adopted by the Welsh Government. Next slide, please. So turning now to future trends. As I said, the staycation trend's been around for a number of years, and the information that we've got supports the view that both 2021, this year, and next year could prove to be very good years for domestic tourism and rural tourism. But where we believed that we would see a peak in the late 2020s, the data from the pandemic suggests that the upward direction of staycation is likely to continue certainly until the early or mid 2030s, and then begin to stabilize or plateau. And when we look at the short-term picture, we've assumed that the dates set out in the roadmap and the Welsh Government decisions can actually be met. What it will do for businesses is, for some businesses, they'll be able to extend their respective seasons longer than normally would be the case. And the key here is flexibility. So what we want to see is again, coming back onto the VAT issue, is to see the benefits from reduced VAT actually filtering through the sector. So the policy instruments which are used are seen to be correct. And if our analysis is indeed correct, we anticipate that 2021 will be a year of correcting the difficulties faced last year by business, and 2022 being the year that the sector took steps to get back to pre-COVID levels. But again, this was all based on an assumption that we won't see another surge in infections that could lead to the reintroduction of lockdown, something, of course, nobody wants to see. Next slide, please. So some final thoughts. I think it's important we look at not just the short term, but the medium and long term as well. And the next 18 months are going to be crucial, both for the economic performance of many rural tourism businesses, but also the future structure of the sector in Wales. That will mean that destination management organisations have a vital role to play in promoting local rural tourism. And we have an opportunity of introducing new schemes, such as new training regimes, and putting in place a proper career path for those who want to work in the rural tourism sector. But it's not just the industry that needs to move forward, it's government as well. And the Welsh Government Tourism Plan is important because it can promote the dynamism within the sector and how the sector can move forward. Next slide, please. So the final slide, short summary. And I'd like to end up with 4 points. First point, COVID-19 has led to structural change. Society and culture has changed together with the way rural tourism is now viewed. And gone are the days of the tea shop economy, which rural tourism is often seen as. The Welsh Government's actions now provide an element of certainty. And so far, the data looks as if we have a chance of making 2021 a time of tourism boom. But the final point I would make is that we can't afford to stop here. Governments, whether it be the Welsh Government or the UK Government, does have a fundamental responsibility to continue to support and engage the sector moving forward. And it's not just now, but it has to be in the years ahead. Thank you very much. Nigel, I think it's back to you.
Thank you, Charles, for that. And there's some really good points there. Just a couple of quick things from me. We live in an area of outstanding natural beauty in South Wales. It's been very quiet. It did get very busy last year, but I think it's got very quiet again. I mean, one thing that does strike me, I think the whole of the UK, and Wales in particular, will get really, really busy very soon. So I think because a number of communities may well be used to that, not necessarily wanting to see lots more visitors, I think a key thing really is to just make sure, and I know you all will, engage with your local communities best you can. We've had a few comments about the 28 to 56 days. There's one on there from Victor Warren. It absolutely is, Victor, in national parks as well. It's every single part of the UK. But I guess the reason I've said what I've said is that some communities might resist it and wonder why it's happening. So what we wouldn't want to do is to have an influx of visitors and members be unprepared for what their local communities might think about that. So I think just be prepared to maybe put some signs up, talk to your local communities, engage more closely with your neighbours, just let them know people are coming in. And this particular change is for this year only. We don't know about the future, it's for this year only. And I think there's real justification for this year being very different because you've all had such a hard year, because of COVID. Anyway, Victor, I hope that answers your question. And I'm now going to hand over to Pitcher, who are going to tell us about what they do. So I think it's over to you first, Olivia.
Hi there. Hi.
Dan.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good.
Thanks for joining us. I'm just going to screen share now. Great. Okay, so we're going to talk to you about the 56-day tent camping opportunity. Just to briefly introduce pitchup.com. In terms of how we come to the opportunity, I was actually brought up on a holiday park in North Devon called Ruda. in Croyd, and during that time actually set up a 28-day campsite in an area of outstanding natural beauty on a heritage coast about 20 years ago. I founded pitchup.com about 10 years ago after ending up at lastminute.com and realizing that there wasn't a website that really tackled the holiday park and campsite industry, and there was in the way that other accommodation types already had. I'm just going to ask Olivia to introduce herself, and she'll be presenting the second half of the presentation.
Thanks, Dan. So my name's Olivia. I've worked at PitchUp now for 3 years as head of account management. I grew up on a bed and breakfast run by my parents and my grandparents in Torquay and Devon. Previously, I've worked at Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Secret Escapes, where I work with lots of luxury hotels across the UK, Middle East and Africa.
Thanks, Olivia. So briefly, what does PitchUp do? We're an online marketplace for selling outdoor holidays. So we have almost 5,000 locations around the world, and that's everything from campsites, even wild camping, through to caravan parks, glamping sites, and fully fledged holiday parks and lodge parks. We've got locations in 67 countries overall, but about half of our locations are actually in the UK. We have just over 20 million annual visits to our site a year who book 3 million nights. Normally, I'd be extolling the virtues of the continental European market, the very keen Dutch campers, the French, Spanish, and so on, who'd be keen to come to the UK. But of course, as Charles has covered, this is very much going to be a staycation year. On the right-hand side, you can see an example of a campsite in Pembrokeshire, which is one of our top performing farm sites. And that just gives you an idea of how a PitchUp listing looks. As you can imagine, we get the majority of our bookings now on the mobile phone, particularly at the last minute. So this covers the breadth of accommodation that we book on pitchup.com. We call it BYO, bring your own at the bottom, and then fixed accommodation at the top. So you've got your glamping units, teepees, yurts, bell tents, of course, particularly popular at the moment for reasons we'll come on to, traditional static caravans, lodges, cabins, pods, tree houses, and then the vehicles and structures that people bring themselves, tents, touring caravans, and motorhomes and camper vans. Here's a selection of some of the, if you like, non-traditional customers that we work with. Of course, we have many traditional caravan parks and campsites on our books, but these are some of the newer entrants. So we've got a number of forest organizations, so Walesby Forest, for example. We've got Castle Howard, quite a few stately homes have come on board in North Yorkshire, Hokum Hall in Norfolk, the Clew Estates in Scotland, as well as various public bodies like Lee Valley in North London and Hampshire County Council. I just thought I'd give you a picture of what 2020 looked like for us. So the orange line is 2020 for each revenue for each month, and the blue line is the year before. So normally we'd see bookings tail off towards the end of the year and then spring back into life just after Christmas, pretty much on Boxing Day. And they would then steadily increase towards a peak in July. Normally they'd stay high for August and then start falling away in early September. Last year, of course, April was the absolute worst month. I think we were 98% down. And there were a couple of speeches in May that set out the plans for leaving lockdown. And then, of course, June, when it was confirmed, I think it was around the 20th. And then we came back to life on 3rd, 4th, 5th of July, depending on where you were in the country. So things really hit the roof then. And in fact, on the day of the speech, we had various servers sort of blowing up in the corner of the room. So we were adding all sorts of capacity to the system. And then things stayed very buoyant throughout the summer into August and even into September. And actually September saw the highest annual growth of any month due to the good weather and the sheer amount of, as Charles said, the pent-up demand that existed hanging over from the spring. Because some of the big boys in online travel are quoted on the stock market in the US, we do have the benefits of their figures now. So they've quoted their numbers for 2020 in their financial filings. And we can see that Airbnb was down just over 40%. This is 2020 versus 2019. Expedia down by almost 55% and Booking.com down by almost 60%. We were down by about 3% globally and actually up about 11% in the UK. And I think this shows two things. Firstly, that the UK performed relatively well compared to the rest of the global travel industry, but also that outdoor accommodation was quite resilient compared to other types of accommodation. And you can imagine that's due to the very well publicized reasons to do with social distancing and the fact that you're out in the open air. For me, this graph represents the crux of the opportunity this year. The number of nights spent abroad by Brits is 500 million, or over 500 million, compared to a domestic market, and this is based on 2019, of around 200 million. So 2.5 times more people traveling abroad or spending nights abroad in a normal year. As some context, the domestic camping caravan market is about 1/4 of that domestic total. So it's the biggest type of accommodation already, but this just shows you the huge amount of demand that is potentially there this year. Of course, no one's expecting the current industry or the current capacity to mop up all of that demand. It probably isn't physically possible, particularly when you think that in a normal year, our tourist accommodation is pretty full already, but it just shows you quite how much there's likely to be spread over the next 6 months. And we're seeing that trend very much in evidence in our latest figures. And you can see here the very large increases we've seen in February and March. We're currently seeing bookings around 3 times more than the equivalent time back in 2019. So as Charles alluded to earlier, the 56-day rule has been a real lifeline to the industry. Of course, the vast majority of our properties on pitchup.com are established campsites. They have licenses and planning permission, but the 56-day rule, which was announced last June in England, and very happily, thanks to in large part to the efforts of the CLA, in Wales last week on the 6th. So it's now possible to have 56 days tent camping, and also you can see at the bottom of this announcement from the Welsh Government that they've also encouraged local planning authorities to prioritise applications in general to support businesses and organisations where the planning impacts are acceptable. So that's potentially something that benefits established sites as well. I also wanted to illustrate just how important camping and caravanning is in Wales compared to other parts of the UK. It's actually 34% of holiday nights spent domestically, compared to only 20% in England and 21% in Scotland. So arguably Wales has the best opportunity of all to capitalise on this year's growth, because the 56-day enables the camping and caravan industry to expand in a way that other types of accommodation simply can't to meet this extra demand. I won't go over this slide in detail, but it really sets out some of the other reasons why we believe there is such momentum behind this sector. So well before the onset of the pandemic, sustainability concerns have been on the agenda. Many of you will remember the Extinction Rebellion protests at airports around the UK. Clearly, camping and caravan holidays are inherently low impact, both in terms of aviation. It's very rare to have to fly to one, but also in terms of the activities that people do when they're there. And of course, the BHNHPA, you may have heard of, the British Holiday and Home Parks Association, has a highly successful David Bellamy Conservation Award scheme, which promotes sustainability at the site. Charles has already mentioned the fact that the staycation is expected to be in evidence as never before this year. There's been enormous media interest. We alone have had around 300 media mentions in the last 10 days. It's quite extraordinary. Affordability is another aspect. Clearly, many people have been made redundant and or aren't in a particularly good financial position otherwise. It's a great option for them. The lure of the countryside, for those of us who've been in small flats and are suffering from quite severe cabin fever by this stage, the ability to get out into nature, again, is something that the camping and caravan sector can uniquely provide compared to other types of accommodation. And it was also commented on at a Downing Street press briefing last May, where the Deputy Chief Medical Officer said, I quote, "It is absolutely a biological truism that outdoor environments are much less of a risk than indoor environments." And then finally, I think the onset of glamping over the last 10 years. I'm sure you're all familiar with the yurts, the tree houses, the teepees and so on that have become available, as well as the new pop-up sites that have prospered over the last 9 months or so, has really, I believe, filled some of the gaps in the market that existed, that was actually preventing a reasonable part of the population from taking this type of holiday. So we really do believe there is something for everyone now in the camping and caravan market. Again, I won't go through this slide in detail, but just wanted to mention that the NHS is now even prescribing what they call green social prescribing, because they recognise the impact of the outdoors on people's physical and mental health. And that's a trial that's currently underway within the NHS and should be expanded nationwide over the coming months and years. There's also a review of national parks and OMBs by the journalist Julian Glover, who made a number of proposals, but central to them is the impact of landscapes on people's health and indeed the inclusion angle, so the ability to bring people to the countryside from deprived areas, younger people, and BAME groups who wouldn't previously have visited. So again, something that the camping and caravan sector can contribute to in a way that others really can't to the same degree. So that gives a bit of context on the situation we're in. I now wanted to just address how you might get started if you're interested in capitalizing on this trend.
Dan, could I possibly ask you to finish off quite soon? Sorry, just because we're a bit short on time and I know Olivia needs to speak, but this is really, really interesting. I appreciate that.
Finish off altogether or to pass to Olivia?
If you could pass to Olivia fairly soon, but your slides are really interesting.
Sure. Okay, I'm just going to run over this one quickly then. Okay, so 56-day tent camping. Charles has already explained this, I believe, but just a couple of points I wanted to mention. Firstly, as soon as the movable structures are on the land, so if you've got toilets, showers as portable buildings or a reception cabin, that does count towards 28 days. You can have them not going consecutively, so you can have a gap in the middle, but the facilities would need to be moved off. And do bear in mind that any kind of engineering work or building work, for example, you can have a bell tent because it relates to tents, but if you were to create a big platform that affixes it to the ground, that would probably require planning. So just bear that in mind. You may also need a camping license, which I've dealt with on the right, and we'll circulate the slides afterwards. Essentially, if you have more than 42 consecutive days, you'll need a license. But something that some of our clients are doing is to have a one-day gap between the periods within the 56 days. Lastly, this is just a quick slide on when the demand happens during a normal year. This is based on 2019. You can see it's very spiky. That's because most of the arrivals are at the weekends. And the 2 bank holidays at the start are in red because we've kind of missed them. But the spring bank holiday at the end of May is clearly a big opportunity. And then obviously the whole July-August period. Okay, Olivia, I'm going to hand over now to talk about some of the financial aspects.
I just had a quick word with Nigel, and I think what we're going to do is we'll actually share this presentation with everyone, because I think there's some bits in here that's probably easier if everyone reads them. I know that Nigel is very short on time. So Nigel, if you're happy, if Dan's got anything else he wants to add, I'll hand back to Nigel and we'll make sure that the rest of these slides are shared with the team.
Yeah, I mean, that would be brilliant. We're happy to share all the slides. Really useful. And the figures, Dan, that you've put up, I think people will need to digest those, but they are really helpful. And feel free to pick up on a couple of the points now if you want, Olivia or Dan. But then if we could just finish off, that would be great.
I mean, we've got a lot more details to go into. I'm happy to run through very quickly if Dan wants to.
I think we can. Yeah, we can probably both. How long have we got?
I mean, I don't know, 2-3 minutes.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I mean, on this one, I would really just pick out the top earner in Wales has earned almost £400,000 in the last year, which is, I mean, certainly knocked me off my chair. The average for a pop-up is around £13,000, but bear in mind that that's based on an English pop-up, and that was pretty much earned in August last year. So you could even say that's per month. Olivia, was there anything you wanted to pick up on this slide?
No, that was the one I was going to highlight was the Welsh site, which is really exciting. Just to give you an idea of what new sites that run a pop-up can open. £12,500 as an average is a great number.
Yeah, and then just over half have electric hookups, and you can normally add about £5 per night if you provide that. And there's some examples on the left of average price per night, which you'll be able to look at later. Olivia, do you want to?
Yeah, so really quickly, we'll just talk about toilets and showers. Over 95% of our sites have toilets and showers on their site. So for a 60 pitch site, you might need to think about ensuring that you've got toilets and showers available. So you would normally need about 4 toilets for women, 2 toilets for men and 2 urinals, and then 2 showers for men and 2 for women. Also things like recycling, access to safe drinking water, bins, and thinking about electric. We have created a really good link on our website. It's called How to Start a Campsite. And it really is the A to Z of how to set up a pop-up site if you wanted to run one. We'll make sure that's shared with you afterwards, but it's a really, really detailed analysis of what's needed, right down to things like insurance, also covering things like toilets and risk assessments that I know are really important at the moment. We've got about 40% more farms on Pitch Up than we did last year, which is really exciting. Farms are a great experience for lots of our customers, and lots of them really enjoy booking farm sites. And
I think on that, I'd say firewood is the top extra, but also there's plenty of opportunity for food and various types of produce. I'm just going to skip through to this slide. Many of you will know the new Countryside Code came out on the 1st of April. So every single booking on PitchUp now gets a copy of that in their confirmation. Clearly, during this time, many visitors to the countryside are going to be visiting for the first time. This is just a quick screenshot to show you that we have a mobile-friendly page. So many of you won't be chained to your desk and will want to be updating your vacancies on mobile. That's possible. We also have a text message service, so you can specify up to 2 mobile phones to receive a text message with new bookings. Lots of coverage, kind of already talked about that. And then finally, I think I'll just leave it on this slide, which is particularly the thing that I think the quote at the bottom left, which is probably my favorite, which is a rural pub in Newmarket. And as we all know, rural pubs are having a pretty tough time at the moment. And one of our pubs said that 50% of the campers they were getting through PitchUp were spending £100 in the bar or restaurant per night. So a great story for the potentially for the business itself and the surrounding community.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan and Olivia. Thank you so much. That's really, really interesting. We'd be delighted to share the slides. There's lots of detail in there. I'm sorry to rush you on time, but I know our delegates will want to disappear at some stage. So thank you very much, both of you, for that. Really, really interesting.
Thanks very much.
I'll hand over to Jeremy and Claire from Lanska, who are going to talk about what they do in terms of their business and what they're up to. So over to both of you.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. I'll just share my screen and get the presentation. I'm mindful of time, so we'll be as quickly as we can.
We're okay for 20 minutes or so.
And we won't drill down too much into the detail. Just slideshow. Okay, right. So Lanska, we're an independent management consultancy based on the Pembrokeshire Carmarthenshire border. So we're in the heartland of the tourism area within Wales. We've been going for 20 years. We've probably helped launch about 2,500 businesses, raised in excess of £150 million in funds, and helped create about 4,500 jobs. A large amount of that is in the tourist economy, which gives you an indication of what our credentials are to possibly speak on the sort of post-COVID implications for tourism businesses in Wales. My personal view is I think that we happen to live and work in one of the most beautiful countries in the world. And I think we do take that for granted. I think a lot of organisations and people who come to Wales take it for granted, and we all need to be ambassadors for promoting the very many special elements and natural landscape that Wales has. Also, within Wales, tourism is one of Wales's 4 foundation economies, the other 3 being care, retail and food. And the link between retail, food and tourism is especially strong. So what I'm going to try and talk about today, quite a high level, is what could be the impact of COVID-19 and what we expect to happen and what we think might happen. And there are a number of consistent themes which are going to crop up. Some of them is a statement of the bloody obvious, and you think, well, why am I spending time online to hear that? I hope there are a number of nuggets and particular themes and aspects about what we say which will provoke thought for you, because I'm genuinely optimistic for rural tourism, primarily in Wales, but a lot of what I'm going to say is also applicable to other parts of the sort of UK. I'm then quickly going to talk through key opportunities and threats and just highlight some of the key things that businesses need to think about. And then we'll talk about marketing activities to consider. And if I can get through this quickly, then I'll pass on to my colleague Claire to ask more specific points, but she'll be online to take questions afterwards. Okay, so quite a fussy screen, so I'm not going to read this through, but on the left we've got short term, what we think will happen, medium, longer term, what we expect to happen going forward. So we're going to have an extended tourism season, and that is largely because of pent-up demand. Also, it's a general view that Wales is becoming open all year round, and that's not just linked to COVID. That's a fact. There are certain big parks, activities, destinations who are opening all year round. And there's a different way that people are considering, life and work. There's a massive change in interest in health and well-being, online purchasing, and people are consequently carrying that forward into their sort of the tourism choices. A key aspect on the short-term thing is, who is your natural customer base? Because COVID has had a massive polarized effect in our society. And three aspects are whether you're young or old, as to whether you feel invulnerable or not, whether you're fit or unfit, but thirdly, whether you've lived in a rural area or an urban area. And most people in rural area, I suspect, would say that we've had it pretty easy in the COVID area. The bulk of the customers that you can expect to see are from urban areas, and they have a different mindset. They've had different pressures that they've had to contend with over the last year. So depending on who your natural target audience is, or who you're trying to appeal, you really need to put yourself in their mind's eye as to what their expectations are and how they want to behave. So those are some of the short-term aspects. In terms of medium, longer terms, we are going to become a healthier, fitter society. There is more migration and relocation to rural areas. We're seeing a lot more innovation in terms of people setting up new businesses. Certainly property in South and West Wales, as soon as it's coming on the market, is being sold largely to incomers, where people are looking to change the way they live and work their life. I do anticipate there is going to be medium term more offshore visitors coming into the UK, because Brexit, funnily enough, I think will make us seem even more foreign. And we are an island. We do have fantastic natural capital throughout the UK. And also you can quite easily get into the UK without getting on the plane. So I do actually think there's going to be an increase in offshore visitors to Wales. And we mustn't underestimate the use of ICT and digital marketing in getting people into our particular areas. And 5 years ago, a lot of small rural businesses, if they were in poor areas of connectivity, were severely hindered from being able to reach audiences to get them here now. That is now becoming a thing of the past. And anyone that ignores digital or online marketing does so at their peril. And people are much more accustomed to with online purchasing now as well. That is not going to go away. That's going to be a consistent theme. So this slide is about what we expect to happen. Most of these things are obvious to you. In terms of what might happen, a bit of more caution, but we would say this is probably still going to happen. There is going to be a net growth in tourism marketplace going forward. And I do anticipate we're going to have a very healthy tourism economy for 5 years plus. I'm quite confident about that. There is going to be more local support for local businesses, and don't underestimate the value of local tourism. Most tourism focuses on bringing in people from the wrong side of the Severn Bridge into Wales. We have 3.3 million people in Wales who are also your natural tourists. So don't ignore the people on your doorstep, because they will be less inclined to want to go abroad, or to travel. There's also a new trend emerging in that people are combining remote working with holidays. So people are going to their destination and they may be working from there and finishing early, or saying they're working online when they're absolutely not. So your ability to provide them with facilities where they can connect, they can work remotely from their yurt or TP or self-catering accommodation, I think is going to become more important. I also anticipate that there may be more funding coming from government to help the tourism economy. We work very closely with Visit Wales, and most of the funding given to Welsh businesses over the last year has been what I would call COVID distress funding. That's to stop the economy from hitting the bottom with a big bang. And so that was to reduce distress. I suspect there may be funding coming forward to help stimulate the tourism economy, but that will be linked to permanent job creation, innovation, and high quality. I also think we're going to have a stretched tourism season going forward as well. Wales is becoming a lot less seasonal, than it was. In terms of medium to longer term, cashless society is going to be, really important. I still think there's going to be significantly less overseas travel, not just for this year, but for the next couple of years. There's greater connectivity, and I do think there is a better appreciation of rural services. And we've noted that a lot of customers who come to our tourism businesses are valuing experiences more over tangible items. In terms of key opportunities, so these are some of the opportunities that I would urge you as people interested in tourism to consider. There is going to be a new tranche of customers coming to Wales who otherwise wouldn't have come here. And there was a very important survey done in Pembrokeshire about 4 years ago, which found that if they could get a new tourist into Pembrokeshire, they were likely to return to Wales. 65% of them were likely to return to Wales. So there are a lot of people who are coming into Wales who may not be going to Wales before or to that part of Wales. So it's a really good opportunity to impress on them what we have. Yeah, so don't underestimate the amount of first-time arrivals to Wales. There is going to be massive growth in self-catered and self-contained accommodation as well. And those with higher quality standards, I suspect, are probably going to do best out of this. There is also an emerging, a more ethical, sustainable consumer who is looking at carbon footprint. They're looking at reducing their impact. They're looking at sort of ethical businesses as well. So don't underestimate that. I think the pandemic has naturally fueled that theme within sort of consumers' lives. And I do think we're going to become a fitter society, which has implications for those that you link to other businesses, or you may have a health and well-being element to your proposition. Reduced travel costs with smarter working practices is here to stay, and also increased use of ICT to run and market your business. That has to be implicit in what you do. So those are some of the key opportunities. In terms of key threats, I have noted a number of organizations that have possibly embarked on what I would call a ripping people off mentality. They put their prices up significantly. And to me, that's fine. You might get first-time customer, but people will know they're going to be ripped off and they're not going to come back again. So I would urge any organizations that is massively hike their prices up because demand is exceeding supply to take a long-term view as to what they're actually doing, because now is the time to build your customer base and to bring these people back. I also would urge businesses not to forget about this last year or chapter, because behaviors have changed, both in terms of consumers and how we live our lives and run our businesses. So think deeply about what the longer term implications are going to be. And also, I think we all have a responsibility to stop others from non-complying, because the impact of this pandemic has been draconian. And if our numbers do increase in certain areas because of non-compliance, they're going to shut everyone down. So I think we all have a responsibility, not necessarily to be serial whistleblowers, but to highlight that people are being non-compliant. So, I think we do need to police, certain activities to check that, we don't get into trouble because of other people's activities. It's the fact that you're going to have to make sure that customers are comfortable with where they're coming to stay. And, compliance with the good to go scheme is going to be really important. Possibly less important for those in rural areas, because I suspect we've got away from it quite easily. But those in big urban conurbations will be of a different mindset than we have. So they're going to be concerned about safety, about going to the pub, about proximity to other places, about sharing facilities and so on and so forth. So as an absolute minimum, you've got to demonstrate real compliance with that. And also, I do not think this pandemic is a one-off. I do suspect there will be further pandemics going forward. And effectively, this pandemic has been like a world war. And all businesses and countries will not want to go through this again. So economies are going to be hypersensitive about the slightest chance of pandemic risk occurring. Therefore, what you have done and learnt over the last year and what you may need to do going forward should look to safeguard and protect your business against the eventuality of this happening again. In terms of what you need to think about now, scrutinize consumer behavior and business behavior. A lot of the stuff in the news is about doom and gloom. There are a huge amount of opportunities, massive shift in changes and trends going on. So really think through what is happening and what impact it has on your business, and take a balanced view. Yeah, there's typically a strong herd instinct in the tourism sector. Well, because that other person seems to be doing well, I'm going to do something that's the same thing. I would not do that. Play to your business, locational, and personal and strengths. Now's the time to be bold and innovative, and don't be afraid to trial new things. I think your consumers are looking for niche products and they want to do different things. And one thing else I would finally say is, absolutely improve your usage of ICT and digital online engagement. That has to be a critical success factor for you going forward. And then the last slide, I know, Claire, I don't know if you want a couple of minutes just to talk through some of these key questions to help businesses get in shape for COVID.
Yeah, I think I've got about 30 seconds or so. So I'll just very, very quickly. It's absolutely important that you think about your marketing. There is a huge opportunity coming to Wales, but there's also going to be a huge competition. So thinking about your marketing could just set ahead of the neighbour who's doing the same as you around the corner. Key to successful marketing is knowing your target audience well enough to be able to reach them efficiently and effectively. So consider by that, I mean, are they coming from urban environments? Are they local? But when you understand that, you understand where you are, then that really opens up marketing possibilities for you. Consider your competition. Who is nearby? What are they doing? How are they marketing? Are they more established than you? Are there any tips that you can pick up? If there are more established businesses that are doing a similar thing to you nearby, they would have already been through these hurdles and sort of understood what works and what doesn't work. And to a certain degree, you can mimic what they're doing to try and sort of, jumpstart your own knowledge, but don't absolutely copy what they're up to. Clearly, have a think about what your USP is, what makes you different. And once you begin to understand all these things, have a think about your target audience once again. But who are they, and can you reach them via digital media? The reason that we'll talk a lot about digital media is because it's cost effective. Have you thought about social media advertising? Do you need a website? I would suggest that you really do need a brand if you're thinking about doing something long term, and a logo. It helps your customers remember who you are and helps sort of establish a feeling around your campsite rather than it just sort of being a field. Can you build marketing partnerships with other local organisations and local influencers? Just by sort of sharing other people's followers in social will enable your own business to reach many more people than it would do naturally of its own accord. Think about flyers and business cards that be left in suitable locations. There are so many opportunities throughout Wales where to reach tourists by placing your information in locations where they visit. Will you use a booking agent? They can do a lot of the work for you, but they will take up to 30% of your, sometimes more, of the money that you make. So have a think about that. But they can also guide you when you first set up. And for some instances, it might be a good idea to use a booking agent and sort of to step back and to do it on your own when you've got a good idea of what the booking agent does and how they do it. Think about road signage, car signage, uniforms, your walking billboard. If you have a uniform and car signage, your driving billboard and road signage is helpful. And also think about how you can maintain information on your customers. You can set up a database, make sure that you sort of follow GDPR rules. But setting up a database of customers means that you can contact them and then really take advantage of the fact that they're more likely to want to visit again going forward. And then finally, what about local press? What about community magazines? What about local newspapers? If you can really drive kind of word of mouth locally, that'll also help for other people to start talking about you, for them to also sort of share your business. Very quick run through. Please do contact me if you have any further questions on that. It's probably a little bit of waffle.
Okay, thank you. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Claire and Jeremy. Anything else you want to share with us? We're all right for a couple of minutes, Jeremy, and then whenever you're ready, we'll dip into the Q&A section.
No, the only thing I would finally say is that we are in a post-pandemic world, but a lot of the stuff that I commented on was happening anyway. And we've been operating in Wales for the last 20 years. And we are the lead diversification consultants for Farming Connect. So we do an awful lot with estates and farms and landowners. And I would say that market forces for the rural tourism economy are probably never better than they are going forward, but it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you think you're going to be busy and successful, then you work hard, you probably will be. If you spend an inordinate amount of time watching the news and listening to social media, especially fake news, then it can be pretty confusing. But certainly feedback from the many hospitality and tourism clients that we've got that are established or are looking to develop is looking very favorable. But you've got to have a very good quality product. You've got to know what you do, and it's got to be fit for purpose.
Germany, is that one of the key points about knowing your market, but also about quality? I mean, I remember as a child, which is a good many years ago, going on holiday somewhere, and no one really was that bothered too much about the food, really. Now everybody wants really nice coffee, good quality alternatives, herbal tea, different types of milks, good quality food, etc., etc. People want more now, don't they? And particularly youngsters want more, don't they, when they're going away?
Yeah, and I would also say that tourism business could say, well, who's your customer? You say everyone. Well, technically, it is everyone. But tourism is becoming a lot more niche. It's much easier to find the specific things that you want to. And often you get, I think, attention, especially around glamping and campsites, as whether you're aimed at families and couples or adults or different. And my view is that the two don't mix easily, but you mustn't be afraid to target that niche. But if you do target that niche, you've got to be really good at it, and you've got to provide them with services and products, that they want. So I think this thing of being all things to all men is becoming a thing of the past, unless you happen to be in an amazing location where they're coming because of the location, and you might be one of the only accommodation providers that they can get.
Presumably, particularly in Wales, in Pembrokeshire, and in fact all parts of rural Wales, people are often coming to kind of get away from things, aren't they? So if you want to go on a really loud holiday where you can go with your friends and do all that sort of thing, that's completely fine. But there's certain areas where people just don't want to do that. So what you're saying about you'll get a clash in markets then, really, won't you, between families and people that want quiet? Really very different. Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much to all of our speakers. That's been really, really helpful. I'm sorry if it felt like I was rushing you on time, but we're trying to sort of get to the Q&A section, which we are actually now. I'm just looking around on the screen best as I can, and speakers do help me as well, but I can't see questions at the moment or hands up. If anybody would like to either wave their hands, is that Alison Gallagher? I think I can see to start off. So Alison, and I'll keep an eye out for other questions as well. Alison, what would you like to ask, and who would you like to ask, please?
I'm muted. Oh no, I'm on.
You are fine, absolutely fine. And if speakers keep their answers fairly brief, that would be great.
Well, I suppose this is for anybody who's got any views on this. Lanska, maybe the council tax business and rates controversy. It's potentially really damaging for self-catering businesses and rural tourism. And in Wales, some local authorities have put up the council tax by 100%. It's quite damaging, really. Of course, you understand the issues about local housing becoming more expensive, but you still got to support rural tourism and people who are in it as a legitimate business. I don't know what the solution's going to be.
No, it's a dilemma, and it's a very different approach depending on which unitary authority you are in Wales. It differs, quite a lot. If you're, alluding to, second homeowners and other bits and pieces like that, then I think whatever we have in place at the moment isn't sufficiently draconian enough to stop that from happening. If they can afford a second home, they can afford an extra £1,000 a year or other bits and pieces. I think the actual, rateable value of a rural business, if they're creating jobs, they're creating a multiplier effect in their local economy, then I would urge any business to speak to their unitary authority to say, listen, we need some help and support here in that particular area. So just because it's mandated and given out doesn't mean to say it can't be challenged, but you've got to give compelling reasons as to why they should possibly review your case.
And I think that point about engaging with local authorities or with Welsh Government or whoever is really important. Alison, we can certainly help with that. But I think let's not feel that we can't change things, because I think we can change things. The 28 to 56 days is probably a good example of that. Is good sound evidence. What local authorities actually don't want to do is to destroy local businesses. Yeah. So be some intended consequences that are coming out of certain policies. But that's a really, really good point. Dan or Olivia, I'm going to maybe suggest we pick up on another point with you next, unless there's anything specific you want to add to that. And I'm just looking around the room. I can't see any more questions at the moment. So we've got one from Margaret, and then perhaps see what Margaret says, and then we can bring Pitch Up in. Is that okay, Margaret?
Thank you, Nigel. I've got a question for Charles talking about VAT.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Right. I've got a problem in that a lot of the businesses you're dealing with, large landowners, will already be VAT registered. I'm not, and my turnover is pushing towards the current threshold. Is there anything the CLA can do to actually lobby government to raise the tax threshold, the VAT threshold, to actually give us a chance to make those investments? Because at the moment, I could make, you know, £5,000–10,000 worth investments for glamping or yurts or whatever, but I've only got, say, a £20,000 headroom before I'm going over into the whole realm of VAT. So what could be done to help people in my position to grow their businesses, to create jobs?
One of the issues that we had before we left the EU was that the UK's VAT threshold was the highest in Europe. Now that the UK has left the EU, and one of the problems that we had in trying to increase the threshold was that it was the highest in Europe. Now that we've left the EU and we're no longer constrained by the fiscal rules from the European Commission, it would be possible to actually increase the VAT threshold. Now, if the argument is that it leads to increased investment over a period of time, that's a very compelling argument and a very compelling reason as to why we would seek to increase the threshold. I prefer more than one compelling argument, but it's something that we would consider, and we'd need to look at it in terms of the benefits to the exchequer over a longer period of time, i.e. over a 5 to 10 year period, which can easily be modelled.
Sure, thank you.
Anybody else like to raise a question? I'm just looking around the room. I can't see anything particularly at the moment. Do shout or do wave or put your hand up. Speakers, can we see anything? Nothing at the moment.
There's a couple of questions in chat. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, right. Teresa Carlisle, I would like to advise as to how to supply electricity to pitches. Maybe that's one for you, Pitcher, possibly?
Yeah, so electricity pitches. We have a lot of sites that have electric hookups. I'm not sure if Dan or I know the exact way of ensuring that you can get electric to your pitches, but certainly a lot of our customers find that very beneficial to have an electric pitch. Dan, have you got any suggestions on how we can get?
Yeah, we've got
we've
one of our FAQs has got the I'll paste in the chat in a minute, but it's got the list of approved installers, and they'd be able to advise on the whole process.
I'll find that and post it.
And
can I just add another point on that? I mean, if you're talking about camping or, you know, glamping or some sort of pop-up activity on that, I have a view that people who come to experience that sort of, you know, vacation or staycation don't mind getting cold and wet. They're coming to the countryside, they've got the gear, they don't mind getting cold and wet, provided they can get warm and dry. Now, a lot of pitches where people sleep, they need accommodation. They don't actually need much electricity, provided they've got, you know, reasonable toilet, shower, changing facilities where they can get warm and dry. To me, that's more important. And we give advice to a lot of organizations where we say focus on the utility facilities that you give them and make sure that the sort of the structure that people are staying in is as warm it can be, it's waterproof, it's not too far from those issues. So being off grid is not too much of a problem. So I think there's a different approach to that, which we would say.
And Teresa,
yeah, sorry.
I was going to say, Teresa, come back to us if you want any more advice on that. You know where we are, so do give us a shout and see if we can help on that. I would just want to comment on that we do see 60% of our pitch bookings do have electric. So there is a very large growth in demand for at pitch electric because of the number of devices people are bringing with them primarily, but also various gadgets that people do have now. Presumably that comes back, Jeremy, in your market, doesn't it? About some people want certain things, but Dan, what you're saying is that some people really
The majority do want it. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you both for that. And Teresa, come back to us if there's any more we can help you on that. I'm going to keep going. If people need to leave, we did say we'd finish about 12:15, but we will keep going for a bit. So do stay with us, or if you need to disappear, then do so. But there's another really interesting question there from Will Fulford. We can do over some health and safety legislation, sprinkler systems, emergency lighting, fireproof means of escape, etc., and a stone cottage adds over £20,000 to our costs. Maybe Jeremy, that's one for you, possibly. Charles?
I mean, I think it's very difficult because we are an increasingly litigious society, and you have to cover your back, and for insurance reasons or risk assessments or other bits and pieces, that compliance is just becoming a heavy burden. And it's not just within this sector, it's any sector. There's nothing more useful I can add apart from making that observation that there needs to be a sort of a fundamental shift in high-level policy making to reduce that burden, to make it easier for people to comply and less cost-effective or more cost-effective.
Okay, I mean, with respect to that, Will, do come back to us if there's anything more we can help you on that. But yeah, Jeremy, I do take your point about that. I don't think legislation is necessarily going to get easier for everybody at the moment.
No.
And there's an interesting question there again from Will Fulford about off-grid composting toilets. You've got a pop-up campsite to install a toilet system might actually be quite challenging. Maybe that's one for you, Olivia or Dan. I know you've been promoting wild or nearly wild camping, which there is definitely a market for. How do you get around the issue of toilets? Because obviously people do need them, but don't want to necessarily install permanent structures. Emily, you want to come back on that? Whether that's for you, a pitch up, or Jeremy again?
I mean, it is pretty niche. Let's just put it like that. I mean, 95% of our bookings would have toilets, and the vast majority of those showers as well. Okay. That said, some people are adopting the porta potty, the solar shower, and various other amazing things you can buy now from Go Outdoors and the like. In composting toilets is something that, yeah, some of our campsites have, but it is a very small number. However, I know in some areas portable buildings are in short supply, so there is certainly a contingent of the camping population, what I call the Bear Grylls contingent, who are happy with that sort of facility.
Yeah.
Does it come down to thinking longer term? If you think you can do very well, you showed some really good figures about what you can potentially make per annum. Is it almost about people that are going to do camping thinking about longer term? It is actually worth investing in some decent toilets because I'm going to get a return over X number of years, rather than just thinking about on an annual basis. Because presumably the thing people will remember most if they go to a site and the toilets are dreadful is that the toilets are dreadful.
Yeah, I mean,
right,
I remember speaking to a director of Haven who, as you know, operates some extremely well-functioning sites, and he said to me, "Do you know what? People care about two things: grass and toilets." Mm. So I think if you get those right, you're on a winner. But I would certainly, if you can get hold of them, even on a portable base. I mean, obviously most of the pop-ups are getting portable toilets and showers, because, as one of the commenters said, you do need planning permission for any kind of development like electric. But I would absolutely get hold of them if you can, because you can charge more, you can appeal to a much broader range of the population, and more likely to win the customer for the future.
Yeah. Okay. Next question, please, from anybody. I'm looking around. I don't think we've got anything else on chat.
Can I just raise a point?
Yeah, please.
It was something that Jeremy was saying about digital marketing. I think it was either Claire or Jeremy saying about digital marketing, which I fully agree, fully support. I think, however, we've all got to bear in mind, in order to be able to do that, in order to actually use the connectivity that you want to actually put over the message, you've actually got to have it. You've actually got to have access to good broadband connections. We know in Wales that isn't particularly the case throughout Wales, particularly in rural Wales. Now, it's something that we've been lobbying on for a number of years, and we are making some progress. But businesses need to be fully aware of that, and they need to think outside the box as to how they can get an effective broadband connection, whether it be a mobile connection, fixed line, wireless connection, things like that, it may not be as straightforward as they think.
Sure.
The beauty of a lot of the digital
Really
media is that
helpful.
it can be, the mobile phones, and I do absolutely agree with what you're saying, but it doesn't require that fixed broadband if you can get a good mobile phone reception.
Yeah.
Still absolutely agree with what you're saying, but it's not as difficult as it's not going to require a massive amount of, it is easier than requiring that broadband connection.
Okay, the point from Jem Watts about very difficult in a national park. Yeah, national parks have their own particular challenges, and yes, I think we acknowledge that. Okay, I can't see any more hands up or questions in chat unless my colleagues will suggest otherwise. So I think we should pull it to a close. I hope that was useful to you all. Really good to see such a good turnout. There's some really good points that have been made there. I'm just going to put the speakers on the spot and just say to them, if there's one or two things, maybe one that you'd like our businesses to take away, what would that be? As quick as you can, short and sweet, one thing they can take away. Should we start with you, Jeremy?
Focus on creating the best possible product or service that you can based on your location and what you want to do as a hospitality owner, because you are an incredibly important part of that product as well.
Brilliant. Charles, you're never short of something useful to say. What would you like to tell our delegates?
I'd say just make sure that the local community which you serve and which your business is part of actually buys in to what you're doing when we come out of lockdown fully.
Dan, again, lots of things I know that you said you might want to give people to take away.
I would just urge people to seize the opportunity that this year presents. I think this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for domestic tourism. And I think what's really exciting for me is the fact that many of the businesses that are going to benefit from this are away from the traditional tourist resorts, away from the honeypots, the coastal areas, in agricultural areas, where a great deal of the local community are going to benefit directly or indirectly. So it's a great opportunity to prove the proof of concept, to do a proof of concept for potentially future years.
Brilliant. Claire, anything further to add to what Jeremy said?
Learn. Don't forget about what we've been through and learn as you go. It's a really massive opportunity to learn.
Brilliant. And Olivia, last but certainly not least.
Yeah, very much what Dan said. It's never too late to think about opening a pop-up site. We had sites going live very late in the summer last year that still did incredibly well. So very much seize the day. If you need any support or help, we're here to help. Fantastic.
Thank you all very much. And can I thank all of our delegates and everybody that's signed in today. Hope that was useful. Do have a fantastic year. The CLA is here if you need us. And do have a great year. Thank you.